Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so we'll call to order. On the agenda today, we're gonna revisit, sort of do the final wrap on the committee interview questions. Hello. Come in.
Hello.
And then we'll look at the board goals. And that should be it. Is there anyone from the public who wants to participate?
Don't think any public members are here.
Well, did she get settled? Hi, nice to see you in person. So, okay, let's see, quorum wise, we have Chris, Paul, Evelina and Ben. Where are we? Six, we should have a quorum. Right?
3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
Yep.
Just checking. So board meeting overview, get my notes. So the board met on 9th. So the big news is Travis was appointed executive director.
Yes, that happened.
Yay.
Thank you.
So that's
Big news.
the big news. And I was reappointed to the committee, as we had that vote last month. We did discuss with the board committee vacancies and the notification about open seats. There's some questioning about well, what we talked about ourselves in the last meeting of having vacancies on the committee and making sure that it was open for interested people to be able to come in and not just lock out the same group. But we reassured them that was not an issue. There's a discussion of the capital project for the office remodel. And it looks like they're almost ready for a request for proposals. And Lance is handling that. And there's some discussion about a work from home policy, I think kind of spurred by that, but also more broadly, right?
Yeah, so I think that came from Joe Pictionary on our board. He wanted to know a little bit about the approach of us doing the remodel. And our approach is we're going to offer more work from home flexibility for the remodel. Presuming that our temporary space that we set up might not have as much room available as what we would probably like or need. So utilizing some of the work from home is where that's coming from. And then more broadly, I think Joe was interested in what the work from home policy or approach for the organization would be once the remodel's done, in the sense that if we spend all this money to redo the office, so to speak, but then everybody just goes and works from home, is that really the best, most equitable use? And I just reaffirm that our work from home policy is essentially some component is in person per week with, I think at the most we have 3 days working from home, but there is flexibility to that policy depending on specific situations. I do envision the remodel. We need to have in-person gatherings and in-person sort of relationship building. So exclusively work from home, I don't think that that's a place where LRAPA is looking to be at. But being open and flexible for work from home capacity is what our interests are, so.
Okay, and then what's the anticipated timeframe for remodel getting started?
So we are out for bid right now on the remodels. Those went out Monday, May 20th. June 5th, I think it is, we have a mandatory bid meeting for anybody who's interested in wanting to submit a bid. They'll come here to the office. We'll have a presentation will be given. They'll be able to look around and actually see the space and get a better understanding of what it is that we're asking to be done. And then the bids are due by June 18th, at which point LRAPA will go through the process of making sure all bids submitted all the required materials. check for competency to, if they say that they can complete the work, making sure that they actually kind of feasibly can complete the work. And then looking at the competitiveness of their bid. That review process will then settle on a most competitive bid that will be brought to the board's July 11th board meeting for them to review and then provide the final yes or no on the remodel project taking place.
So assuming all that goes through and depending on contractor availability, conceivably fall.
Yes, so I think at the earliest, we would be sort of moving out of this office into the temporary space, wherever that may be, at the end of July, at the earliest. One of the things that's an unknown right now that we won't know is, hypothetically speaking, if the most competitive bid comes in and they say, we can't start doing work until August, then clearly we're not going to necessarily move out until a little bit closer to that time frame. So, or September, whenever that case may be. So that's a component that's not yet settled that can have a pretty big impact on the plans. But it's still, that being not known, we're still trying to prepare to be moving out of here at the end of July. And it would be a 6 to 8 month remodel window. So the rest of 2024 and then moving into the new place early next year.
Okay. So let's see, there was a report on the Oak Ridge Air Grant activities. And then in your director's report, there's some discussion about wildfire emissions and adjusting. I didn't keep very good notes here.
In like,
I think it was going to EPA to allow, or am I misremembering?
I'm not quite sure what that discussion was on. I did have.
A note about fuel mitigation. I should get more complete notes apparently.
Does that draw anything in your brain, Heather, from the end of the meeting last?
Must not have been too important.
Okay. I'm just trying to recall what, I mean, I do think that some of the discussion we had about wildfire mitigation is just, where is LRAPA? And I think this kind of connects to the board goals conversation on the topic of wildfires, because it's not like LRAPA can go to a wildfire and say, here's your permit. Oh, emission requirements that you need to follow. That relationship doesn't exist in that way. So where is the regulator's place and presence when it comes to wildfire topic? Is it engaging with landowners and managers like the Willamette National Forest and timber industry to say, how are you managing your fuel load? Let's talk about that. Is another place of entry for LRAPA on this topic in the, if we can't minimize pollution reduction, can we help assist people in avoiding exposure to that pollution? I think that that kind of gets a little bit more in the public health sort of component of playing. So at least on the wildfire mitigation topic, I think from a regulatory perspective, there's kind of different roads that could be gone down. And I think that's worth exploration for the board to consider on what kind of organization LRAPA should be in that full topic.
Okay. I think that's the high points from the board meeting. So unless you have anything to add, we can move on to the interview questions.
I'll just say that I was appreciative to the board of the appointment as executive director. I see that as a role that me being kind of a young kid in many ways in that position, we'll have to do a lot of growing into it, but I certainly am excited and feeling resolute in helping LRAPA be a better organization.
All right. So in our last meeting, we went through this list of questions and we all picked our favorites. And then there are a lot of commonalities and pretty much agreed that everything that came up was worth keeping in the, at least keep it in the quiver for possible use. But we had fairly light attendance in April and wanted to give it one more pass so that people who weren't in attendance could weigh in also. So let's see, remind me, the highlighted ones are the ones we liked?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was emailed to us all and the floor is open if anybody wants to discuss any of this in detail or propose another question to go in the list.
And just as a reminder, these are different than the questions that are already up, so,
Right, these are
In
ones
addition
we
to-
would
yeah.
have available to bring up in an interview. And I think the thought was too that we would provide these potential questions to the applicants before the interview. So, see, I don't see any hands up there. This could be a real short topic.
Fine.
Anything jumping out at you, Teresa?
No.
Okay,
All right.
well, we'll call that complete then and keep those in mind for when we have
And
a,
we had discussed, we don't have to ask all of these, depending on how the interview goes. It just gives us some
yeah,
talking
or the
points if it
situation.
gets quiet and awkward during an interview. All right.
Okay. Well, moving on. So what we have here is some the goals.
Oh, yeah.
And so in this document we have, what this is to go before the board.
So what I provided here was basically a staff report to the CAC, which I know that the CAC does not receive staff reports from us very often. But I put one together here, and essentially what it is the closest thing you could say, or the comparable thing that LRAPA has to a strategic plan is these board goals that is set by the board. The last time the board did it was in January 2022, so that's some time ago. The board, at the last meeting, the June meeting, I asked the board if we could schedule a work session to go over these and to update them. They weren't as much interested in a work session and instead preferred that LRAPA just draft some potential goals for the organization to consider and then bring them to the board in their September meeting for them to review, modify, potentially approve. I suggested, I have as executive director, one of the goals that I have for the Citizen Advisory Committee, particularly in its relationship to the board, is to look for opportunities for the CAC to function in their role as a advisory committee and provide feedback and perspective and things for the board to consider. I think historically, this committee has been used for things like helping to draft fact sheets and other items, which is good and helpful. But I think that providing perspective and opinion and insight from the diverse group of stakeholders at this committee is really the best approach.
Yeah.
So I saw this as an opportunity for the CAC to reflect and have discussion with one another and with LRAPA and myself of what some new potential things to focus on for the goals should be. So you see there are the old board goals. Some of them are a little outdated, like for example, the Oak Ridge West River Quality Improvement. Oak Ridge is in attainment for the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, as when that was set, they were out attainment. So is that worth removing that as a goal, or does that just change to, still supporting the Oak Ridge West for airshed, but might not necessarily be attainment thing? And then on the back questions, I have some just things that might be worth thinking about to spur some good discussion with the group.
Okay, well, should we just go through this first numbered list from 2022
Yeah,
and then talk about others later? We should have plenty of time. So starting off, Oak Ridge, West for air quality. So currently what you have are some grants.
Yeah,
And the good company is managing that. So they're doing
wood stove swap outs.
wood stove swap outs, but also involves excuse me, related. Sorry about that, I forgot. Okay, so, but it's not just wood stove swap out necessarily. Sometimes it could involve weatherization
Right,
or a new roof.
yeah. Mhm.
And given some of the economic issues in Oak Ridge, that's turned out to be an important thing.
Yeah,
Let's see, there's a firewood swap.
community firewood program. Mhm.
So that's swapping green for dry.
So that's essentially finding source wood somewhere, whether it's from like the Forest Service or Rexia sometimes has, even Lane Forest Products, I think, has had some leftover source wood that they've been able to donate or provide at a lower rate to the community firewood program. And then they process that wood, make sure it seasons and dries, and then they provide that wood to the community at a discounted rate if you are basically qualified for their sort of requirements.
Anything else where there's a lot of little things or small
Yes.
things going on
A
too.
lot of small things with the targeted airship grant. I think that one thing that could change in this goal is, so this goal is focused on basically bringing Oak Ridge from non-attainment with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards to attainment, which we have checked that box. So it could be that this adjusts to still supporting clean air projects in the
Mhm.
Oak
Yeah.
Ridge Westford area.
Maintenance
Update the
and
objective.
further
Or
improvement.
continue.
Yeah, something along those lines. Another thing that's too kind of related to that is that grant program that we have of wood stove swap outs, ductless heat pumps install, which is focused in Oak Ridge. Another potential idea, whether it's connected to this goal or not, is to look for funding to expand that program or model elsewhere across the county too. So just another thought also.
Okay. And then as far as the grant cycles go, funding is,
Right now, funding is open and available thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by the Biden administration. So there's a lot of funding on the table, so to speak. Other funding revenue that we follow or that we get are general fund supported, and those are a little bit more limited, I guess you could say, but are more recurring in the sense that we can still benefit from them over time.
okay, so there's not necessarily a sunset in view of.
Well, the targeted airship grant, that will sunset by the end of 2028. We got an environmental justice government grant, which also will end 2028. So those type of grants to do those types of programs and swap outs, those are one-time grant efforts. So if we wanted to continue the West for Oak Ridge air quality kind of improvements, that would sort of require us to, in time, seek additional funding and land some grants that would continue to do those types of programs.
Okay, well,
Paul has a question.
oh, good. Go ahead, Paul.
Did I hear correctly, Jim? You said that the Oak Ridge West Fur air quality improvement paid for some people to get new roofs?
Yeah, that was part of it. What they determined is that it didn't make much sense to put in a new heat pump or swap out a wood stove if the house was already leaky and well, leaky in terms of weatherization or other issues. Kind of like putting a new patch on old cloth. They wanted to make sure the house itself was stable. I don't know if I'm
Yeah,
describing that very
Well,
well.
there is primarily a wood stove change out program. But there are also other interventions that will occur, such as installing a ductless heat pump, or doing weatherization work, which can be putting more insulation into the attic. Small home repair is included, so I wouldn't say there's enough funding to replace someone's roof. But there is funding that if there's like some roof repair that would be beneficial from a how well the home retains heat and stays warm perspective, then there is funding and flexibility to offer some of those services.
So for example, if you got a leaky roof, it doesn't make sense to put new insulation in there.
Right, so you
And have
wanna
it get
fix the
ruined.
roof, right, so.
Well, now is this entirely funded by grants, or is some of this funding from the fees that people pay on their permits?
That is 100% grant funded. We have a targeted airshed grant for that work in Oak Ridge. And it limits us to doing that work only in the Oak Ridge airshed. So as a goal here for this topic, I think that the goal is still pertinent in the sense that I think support of the Oak Ridge airshed is needed. But whether it's focused on specifically going to attainment for the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, I think that probably could be changed and modified. And then as well as is that whole wood stove swap out program that LRAPA is doing in Oak Ridge. Should LRAPA as an organization be exploring other opportunities for funding to support that kind of work, but elsewhere in the county besides just in Oak Ridge? So I think that's just another thought of consideration for the CAC here.
Yeah, a little background for newer folks too is the Oak Ridge airshed is in kind of a unique position that just because of the topography, they tend to get air temperature inversions that holds in air pollution. And then there's enough people of limited means that heating with wood is a pretty common way of getting through the winter. And yeah, that's the main thing. So after years of struggle, finally gotten to attainment as far as the air standards. And now the question is how to keep it and improve if possible.
Well, I guess a concern I would have, the board goals is to improve air quality. And, to an outsider, this would appear to be mission creep, that LRAPA is just doing home repairs.
Yeah, perhaps I overstated that home repair aspect. It's really aimed at stopping dirty wood stoves.
It's at its heart, it's a wood stove change out program that just incorporates additional interventions that can make sense for some homes. From helping the home retain heat better, so there's not as much of a need to burn wood to heat the home in the first place.
And I guess my point of bringing it up in the first place was just to be clear, it's a complex situation, emission by emission. So there's more to it than just changing out a wood stove.
Yeah.
Right, but obviously, once the wood stove's gone, then, the emissions problems are addressed. And so then further questions about infiltration and insulation aren't germane anymore.
Well, they're not gonna be able to remove the wood stove and install an alternative if they don't fix things. So it's all related, right? So.
Yeah, they're not doing more than.
Yeah, they're not doing more than what's necessary to remove the wood stove.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
take an old wood stove, put a cleaner one in, install a ductless heat pump if there's not a second form of heat. And if some insulation in the attic is gonna help the home stay warmer in the winter, then we'll throw some insulation in the attic. That's kind of, that's sort of the holistic
Yeah.
approach to it.
And I guess part of the insulation question is if you're better insulated, then you're burning less.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, it's harder to quantify the better insulated home and emission reductions. That's a complicated sort of estimate, but presumably, if a home is staying warmer, there's not as much wood that needs to be burned to heat it. There's also an energy efficiency component to that too, to where even if they're not using their wood stove and instead just heating with the newly installed ductless heat pump, there's going to be less energy that's required of that heat pump to heat the home, assuming it is retaining its heat better.
Right, right. But, you know, efficiency is not LRAPA's domain.
I mean, I would say that energy efficiency from a source of emissions, like a wood stove swap out program very much is within LRAPA's mission. And I would think providing secondary forms of heat source to wood stoves is within LRAPA's mission, because then people won't have to use the wood stove. And then from an energy efficiency perspective, I still think that's well within LRAPA's mission, because if a home is more energy efficient, there's less need for electricity and the emissions that can go along with generating that electricity. Here in the Pacific Northwest, most of our power is hydropower. EWEB and other local public utilities receive quite a bit of power from the Bonneville Power Administration, but a more energy efficient home just in general is going to reduce emissions from a residential sector perspective.
Same is true of even industry, is a lot of the mitigation around reducing that is improving efficiencies and newer technology, so they kind of go hand in hand.
Well, and another unique aspect with Oak Ridge is there any permitted industrial source other than the
There's
aggregate
no
yards?
no.
So really all that issue of pollution in that community is all about wood burning, really.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's why there's so much focus on that.
Yeah. Nice. We can update
Okay.
the objectives around that.
So, yeah, it sounds like we'd just be looking at maintenance and
Yeah, I mean, if
incremental improvements.
we kind of go through these goals here and give a little bit more context to each one of them. So internal efficiency enhancement, number 2, streamlining internal processes and policies for improved efficiencies. I think that that's kind of one of those ones that you could always be an ongoing goal. I think that as we become more internally efficient, that's helpful. I do think that there are places LRAPA can do things differently to improve some internal efficiencies. If any sort of adjustment to that goal could just be maybe being more specific or a little bit more context of what that focus should be. On the pre-budget planning, plan ahead for budget committee meetings to ensure financial stability. That's another kind of one of those ongoing goals, in the sense that you're forward thinking in your communication to the budget committee, so that way they can be prepared to ask good questions and we can come up with a budget.
Well, yeah, let's go back to the
Okay.
internal efficiency enhancement. Are there concrete things that have been done in the last couple of years?
Internal, well, one of the projects that I'd say that I have us working on right now, LRAPA as an organization, is our internal filing structure. So our filing structure that we use right now was developed over a decade ago, many years. And essentially, as people use your internal organizing structure, and as people don't follow it maybe as well as they ought to have followed it, things start to get a little messy. And so one of the things I have us working on right now is to go through the process of creating a new folder, subfolder sort of structure for all of our data, so to speak. So we can keep our files sorted in a more organized fashion, and so it's easier to find all of the information you have.
Do you have any other specific things? I mean, I would say that even the working from home would qualify as one of those internal processes and like policies. So do you have like a small list of other ones that would be
Yes.
good to kind of
Well, so on that,
Online,
it's moving
short-term
the
goals.
organization more digital.
Mhm.
So we still have quite a bit of paperwork that we move around. We still have filing cabinets where we have to print it and then file it in a physical file. And so a longer term goal really would be moving our paperwork and our workflows all to a digital format.
So are you keeping records back through the full history of a permit source?
You know, for all the retention requirements. So for Title V sources, that's a lot longer than ACDP, but we follow our retention schedule. So we don't save everything back to the beginning of time because we don't have to, but we do follow the retention schedule.
Is that in the order? I know for the permittee, it's 5 years. Is it more than that?
If it's Title V, it's 40 years. If it's ACDP, it changes a little bit, but I believe it's around that 5 to 10, 5 to 20.
I've never asked that question before. Anything else on that particular one? Okay. Let's see, pre-budget planning. Paul, do you have any thoughts since you served on budget committee? How did it go this year?
Pretty smooth, I thought, and I don't have any particular thoughts.
Okay. So let's see, next, number 4 is the financial stability assessment. Where does that stand?
So that is a understanding all of our revenue versus our expenditures and making sure ideally that we are not overspending what we're making essentially. So that's assessing and understanding what our reliable, more consistent sources of funding are versus our sources of funding that are not so consistent. As an example, our grant fund, our targeted airship grant that we were just talking about, doing all that work up at Oak Ridge, that is a non-reoccurring grant. And so once and it does support some of LRAPA's staff and LRAPA time, there is some support of the general fund through it. So when that grant ends, which will be in 2028, we will have to ideally have another grant that can sort of provide that support to the organization, or be ready to adjust if we don't. So I think that that's having a clear picture of where that is. And I would think the next layer of detailing this further would be making sure that we fully, especially myself as the new executive director, understand LRAPA's cost allocation approach, such as if we have money from this place, we have money from this place, and we have money from that place, how are all of those things collectively kind of like paying for everything and everybody's time? And that cost allocation, making sure that myself and the administrative component of LRAPA has a good understanding of how that is broken up and done.
Well, yeah, and one thing along those lines that comes to mind is that Title V fees can only be spent on Title V, right?
Yeah.
And seems to me a few years back, I think when Flakeboard closed down, there was a bit of a, oh my gosh, we gotta get prepared since that income isn't gonna be there.
And when until DEQ passed, or not DEQ, the Oregon legislature, I should say, because they're the only ones who have authority to do it, raised Title V fees a couple of years ago. Our Title V fund was a bit in dire straits, similar to what DEQ's Title V fund was. But these increase in fees passed by the Oregon legislature in the long session most recently raised those fees and has been very helpful in those funds from being running out of money.
So if a similar occurrence happened, it would be less dire.
Yeah, so right now, I mean, if any Title V source closed in Lane County, we'd have to look very carefully at what that impact would be on the Title V fund. But because of recent fee increases, the fund has stabilized.
So as we talk about these, some of these seem like more short-term goals that were like instigated probably for a particular reason, but now they're fairly vague and some of them are ongoing. So is the goal here, do you know if the goal in 2022 was like in the next year? Was this like a 2-year strategy? And or because the ongoing, or is this just like the overarching goals or a little bit of both?
So this was, these goals and engagement with the board was the approach that Steve Dietrich, my predecessor, took in how to communicate between the board, what the strategic sort of approaches are versus what Steve was working on. So I can't speak to all of those in terms of what he was setting out. But yeah, some of them are short-term, like for example, the website redesign. We published our new website in September of 2022. So I still think updating and maintaining the website redesign or the website seems to be like a pretty reasonable goal. But do we need to have a goal of redesigning the website? I don't necessarily know so. Another one is the Airmetrics Enterprise Evaluation. So the board in December voted to close the Airmetrics Enterprise Fund. So that seems to be a goal that doesn't really have a lot of applicability any longer. The complaint intake process improvement, that was something that we have completed in January of this year. In the sense that we had an old program doing complaints and now we have incorporated it into a different program that's a little more updated. So that's one that could potentially be updated. And then as far as all the other ones, I really would describe them as being a kind of ongoing goal. The one being that Oak Ridge West for air quality improvement, because that specifically, even though it doesn't say it here, was a get Oak Ridge into maintenance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standard when at the time they were non-attainment. So that goal was checked. But that still, I think, has merit in the sense that LRAPA very much still should be present in the community, like all the community across Lane County, working on those specific items. So for those lists, I would identify those as ones that potentially could benefit from a little bit of either an update to it or something new entirely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it seems clear air metrics could just be removed.
So the idea is you're gonna go back to the board though with these are the general goals of LRAPA for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so
Okay,
what
the
I would
main things
do
are- okay.
is I would like to hear from the CAC, whether it's specific goal with specific language that they would like the board to consider. Or if it's more just a general, here's what we think would be good for LRAPA to focus on. And then I can take that information, incorporate it into some proposed goals, which I then will bring to the board in September for discussion with them. So I think the CAC, if you want to, I think something that could be helpful is just a general conversation about, from your all perspective, what are some of the things that LRAPA can or should be doing that might be good to consider or think about? And we could just, make note of those items and then I can take those ideas, I'll refine them into what could be a proposed goal to go before the board.
And sorry for not knowing this, but the rest of the county is in attainment. Oak Ridge Westford was the
Yes.
only area.
Yep, and so now Oak Ridge is in maintenance, which there's another maintenance plan in Lane County, and that's the Eugene Springfield area. They're farther along in their maintenance plan, so once an airshed goes from non-attainment, meaning they're not meeting the federal standards, to maintenance, which means they're maintaining or meeting the federal standard, there are 2 10-year maintenance plan cycles. So Oak Ridge's 10-year maintenance plan cycle, the first one just started in 2022. The Eugene Springfield area, we are in the second, which started like 2 years ago, last year, the second maintenance plan for PM10 for the Eugene Springfield metro area. And so we, as LRAPA, have to still make sure we're doing things and performing work to maintain those statuses. So in Oak Ridge, the work is no longer working to make air quality below this line. And instead is now working to make the air quality stays below the line. Which the EPA did lower that line too in the spring, so yeah.
And wood stoves are a major emission source in that area. What are the other major emission sources?
In Oak Ridge, it's basically just wildfires. They don't have a lot of industry pollution, so wood stove smoke and then wildfire smoke. I would say broadly across Lane County, if you remove transportation, which El Rapa doesn't have authority over from the emission window, then it basically comes down to wood stoves, even in terms of air emissions in the Eugene Springfield metro area. And then following that, the next big source is going to be wildfire smoke. Well, wildfire smoke's bigger than wood stoves, but that's another thing that we can't really do much about. So after wood stoves, then I believe the next source are just sort of things like your industry source pollution. So a place where I do see a potential wood stove swap out program or some form of work similar to what we're doing in Oak Ridge. Could be something in the Bethel neighborhood or the West Eugene area. In November of this most recent year, El Rapa called some red Homewood Heating Days, which is where we say no wood stove usage allowed because air quality is bad. And typically, we always call these days up in Oak Ridge because that's where air quality has been bad because of wood stoves. But in this most recent November, we were calling red days in the Eugene Springfield area because of elevated air quality in the West Eugene region, while Oak Ridge air quality was fine. And they did not need any red days. And so that was kind of a first in a few years that El Rapa has done that. So I do think there are other communities in Lane County that would benefit from some of this type effort that El Rapa is performing in Oak Ridge.
How is compliance on red days in Eugene Springfield?
I would say not as robust as what it is in Oak Ridge, and part of that is because the Oak Ridge community, I think, is very familiar with our green, yellow, red Homewood Heating Days. As where I would say that outward promotion of our Homewood Heating program is not as robust or as specifically targeted in Eugene Springfield as it has been in Oak Ridge over the years.
Is this an issue in other communities besides Oak Ridge, Eugene Springfield?
Yes, in the Pacific Northwest, wood stove programs needing to take place to improve air quality because of attainment issues is very common. Klamath Falls is an example. There's a number of communities up in Washington and Idaho who have similar things where there's a reliance on wood stoves for heat. And as a result of that, there's elevated particulate matter in the air shed.
I guess what I'm getting at is Veneta, Florence,
Oh,
some of those communities is there even a program for red days?
no, the only red Homewood Heating Days that exist in Lane County or Homewood Heating Program is the Eugene Springfield metro areas. And that's because both cities have enacted city code. And then they pass that authority of city code to El Rapa to enforce. And Oak Ridge as well. Oak Ridge has also adopted city code, setting this red, yellow, green Homewood Heating Program and ordinance, and then passed authority to enforce that to El Rapa.
Is there a practical need for that in other communities like that?
I wouldn't say so. In Oak Ridge, it's needed because of the reliance of wood stove heat in Oak Ridge. This community doesn't have access to natural gas. So an electric heat is generally more expensive and in the winter is unreliable. And on top of that, Oak Ridge kind of sits in a bowl a little bit of the terrain. So inversions happen a little bit more. There's a higher use of wood stove heat. And so they have an air quality issue. I would say smaller locations like out to Lowell, Veneta, even out to Florence, their communities are small enough and they don't have some of the topographical constraints that Oak Ridge does, that not enough air pollution is essentially being created that's getting trapped. As where in the Eugene Springfield area, particularly the West Eugene area, there's enough population of people who are using their wood stoves. And it's not like a wood stove creates a significant amount of pollution, it's relatively low. But when a lot of people are
Yeah.
using their wood stoves collectively, that's when you can see that compounding effect.
Even from an educational standpoint about outreach and knowledge, that surprised me to hear your order.
Oh.
From transportation, wildfires, then wood stoves, then industry.
Well, and
Anyways,
wood
kinda
stoves
fascinating.
is one of those things where like with industry,
Yeah.
we can go to an industry source and we can say. Your boilers have to be between these temperatures and you have to only feed so much fuel into it at a time. And we have specific prescriptive requirements of how you use the equipment and what the process looks like. But we don't go into people's homes and provide that same level of like, here's exactly how you're going to use this piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And here's all of the expectations we have of you. It's more free for people to use it as they see fit. And a lot of times those behaviors have them using their wood stoves in ways that create more smoke than otherwise could happen.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about that in terms of goals. I mean, would a goal be to improve community understanding of green, yellow, red days?
I think that a goal.
Rescue Gene?
Yeah, a goal could be sort of building on efforts or expanding outreach and education efforts on El Rapa's home and heating
Mhm.
program. I think another potential idea that could connect to this, and this also connects more to goal, I would say, the goal 8, which is funding source diversification, such as being open and interested and willing to seek out and pursue funding to do things like a wood stove change out program.
Yeah, expanding that to other areas would help too with with the red days and
Yeah,
getting that information out.
right, because you can take the problem from the approach of we just need to make sure people are using their wood stoves better on days when air stagnation is taking place, which is true. But then there's another approach to the problem also, which is we can help people swap out their uncertified wood stoves with cleaner burning wood stoves, install ductless heat pumps, weatherize their homes, so there's less need to use as much heat. And to Paul's point, in the sense of that doesn't necessarily have to be El Rapa, the organization that's doing this work. And we're not the organization that's doing that work in Oak Ridge, but we are the organization that has secured funding. And then we provide that funding to nonprofits and other places where they can do that work.
Currently, how does LARAPA decide, like just thinking about goals? Like one of the goals is financial diversification, but how do you decide what funding opportunities to go for or what grants to go for? And like, do we want goals that guide what you're going to pursue funding for, such that, something that is related to air quality, but not one of the goals comes up and we don't apply for that grant? Yeah, how specific do you want these goals to be?
That's a good question, and that is where I'm still new in this role, and that becomes a conversation relationship with the board and how involved they want to be on these kind of decision-making processes. I would say at the moment, the way it would work, and this could change depending on the board's perspective, is the executive director identifies opportunities of funding that exists, assesses how well they align with these strategic goals that have been brought before the board. And then if that person, that position, so I guess myself, thinks that this potential opportunity aligns really well with multiple goals, then the next step is bringing that idea before the board, saying, here is an effort that El Rapa wants to work on. Does the board think that's a good idea? Yes, no, or otherwise. So I think that that's the approach right now. And considering the size of the organization, I think that that's why it's of that, just kind of up to the executive director to have a holistic understanding of opportunities and then identify what to bring before the board.
Yeah, because some of these are so specific things, and there's other ones that are just these broad statements. So I'm trying to think about did the board ask for some goals at the time in 2022, or was this is it driven by something? And we don't need to spend time,
Yeah,
on it,
yeah.
but like moving forward, what is our goal to give to the board? Because I do like having some, even short term, being like a year or two of things that we're working towards
Mhm.
and having a little bit of specificity. I like that. There's ongoing things like you should always be worried about your budget. You should always be thinking about, certain things, but if there are specifics, it would be nice to know what those are.
Yeah,
That's kind of where.
The goal could be like financial wellness and then pre-budget planning and assessment and funding source diversification
Yeah.
could be objectives under.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that.
and then perhaps I even think in the recommendation to the board could even just be that perspective in the sense of like, the CAC feels that these goals, whatever they may be, should have, ongoing long-term goals, but also should include some of those shorter, more specific metric-based sort of goals, and I even think that feedback being summarized, and provided to the board has merit in of itself.
So we're getting close to time for a roundtable or just past. Is this something we have time to discuss next meeting?
Yeah, so the goal on the calendar is to get this before the board for their September board meeting. The board does not meet in August and neither does the CAC. So today's May, so we will have the June and then the July board meeting or CAC meetings to review this topic. With, I think the goal for the CAC is to have some clear, whether they're goals themselves specifically or just more holistic ideas and concepts and recommendations for the board. To have those established and figured out by the end of the July meeting.
Okay, well, let's keep all this in mind over the next month and take the discussion up again for June as the main topic, unless something new pops up. All right. So roundtable, let's see, we'll start with folks online. Ben, you're in the top left-hand corner, so anything for roundtable?
Sure, yeah. I guess I just like going back to that conversation a little bit, like think about Eugene Springfield as kind of similar to.
Hey, hang on a second, we got an audio issue.
Can
Oh,
turn off his own speaker.
Just try muting us real quick, Heather, for a second, seeing if that.
Oh,
Well, that moved Evelina to the top there. Anything for roundtable?
No, not really. It was a very interesting discussion, and I was wondering how Arapa advertises the grants. Do you post them on the website, or do you like give brochures to the population, like for example in Oak Ridge?
Yes, that's a good question, Evelina. So we do publish on our website information about home heating. In Oak Ridge, there's been a lot more direct outreach in the sense that the Oak Ridge Police Department, we had a subaward to them for a while to help do some of that promotional outreach. We actually, part of our targeted area grant has funding to promote the program, which includes this Homewood Heating program. And there's reader boards in the Oak Ridge area where we say on it, today's a green Homewood Heating Day or yellow Homewood Heating Day. So there's a lot more visibility. In the Eugene Springfield area, we do not have much outreach or service of our Homewood Heating other than promotion on our website, as well as just conversations with people one-to-one at booths and other things. So I think that promoting our Homewood Heating program in the Eugene Springfield metro area is a reasonable effort for Arapa to take in the short term.
Does that answer your question, or are you more about how do they get the good company or other companies to work on, to use the grant?
No, that answers my question, which leads to another question is like the red burning days or however I can't remember how you call them. Is that something we also post on the website, or you post at Arapa, or how is it broadcasted to the public as well, which I think you kind of answered it, so.
Yeah,
Okay,
but that's also just a quick follow-up question too. So when we do issue a red day, particularly in the Eugene Springfield area, or even a yellow day, there's a press release that's sent. We do have an email listserv that goes out that people sign up to. So we do provide that external outward communication when those events happen. Because we need to tell people about them if we want them to be aware and follow it.
Does local news ever bring that up?
yeah,
Okay.
Sometimes,
radio news, like,
yeah.
seems like KLCC
Okay,
is pretty.
so I feel like
good
I've
at
heard it, but not consistently.
Yeah, we usually, the first one of the season will get some interest on it, but then if it's another one, like the next week or a couple weeks later, they're like, we already told that story. We're not, so we don't get them all the time, but
Okay.
usually the first one of the year we'll get attention on.
Great.
Okay, thank you, and congratulations on your new position.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, Ben, let's try again.
Okay, I think I got it this time. Sorry about that.
Sounds good.
So yeah, I guess, largely the reason I got on this was as an outdoor worker, like dealing with some of these air issues during wildfire season and, excuse my ignorance for like where the regulatory boundaries are here. But, I think of like Eugene Springfield as kind of just a bigger bowl than Oak Ridge. And so, when it gets bad, it gets really bad. And so figuring out how to address that from like a prevention standpoint in some of the surrounding forests, I think I know this is a big conversation that we're not going to have right now, but I would be curious to kind of explore the bounds of what El Rapa is capable of in that respect.
Well, I think that fits in with the goals discussion too, so
Mhm.
we could take a deeper dive next time. Anything else?
Not for me.
Okay. Chris had a thumbs up on that statement. Anything else you want to say?
Who, me?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Ben 1,000%. I think of the topics of wood stoves and onesies, twosies, and red areas and days, and we hit the summertime and we have weeks or months where you can't even see the sun. It's I think it's a huge issue, and that's what I'll bring forward as potential topics. In our next meeting, mitigation work. How do we? I mean, to me, it's just absolutely glaring. So I appreciate hearing somebody other than myself. Obviously, Ben, I work for the Department of Forestry, relatively new. We haven't interacted a lot, but it's been my life's work for 36 years. So it's a passionate topic for me, but I think we can do better as a society. And it's, does El Rapa have a voice? Well, maybe not as much as, as federal agencies, EPA, whatever, right? But I still think we have I think we have a valid place to speak and to talk into the topic. So anyway, as far as other things, hot topic roundtable, just getting ready for fire season, right? And speaking of weather, and I'm not working locally right now. I'm working in Salem, so I don't know. I haven't talked to the local districts, Veneta or Springfield, to see about burn ban. I mean, that's something that's coming up. I would think that we're probably looking at June 15th. I haven't heard any rumblings from my colleagues down there about asking for it earlier, but now that just popped into my head, as soon as this meeting's over, I'll send out an email to see if I can get any updated information from those folks and give you a heads up, Travis, if I'm hearing anything. But I would anticipate, based on the weather, that probably the 15th it will be that normal shut off.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And yeah, any insight you can provide on that, Chris, be helpful. Our approach is we just kind of wait until we hear it's time to turn the season off, and then we'll turn it off. So.
Yeah, and I usually, we do that in conjunction with the local fire chiefs as well, so that everybody's on the
Yeah.
same page. And I'm not wearing that hat right now, so I'm a little bit unplugged to the topic, but I'll try to rattle the cage, make sure somebody reaches out.
Thanks, Chris. Paul, anything for roundtable?
Yeah, I was very interested to hear the comments. I think it was from you, Travis, who you said all communities in the El Rapa jurisdiction are, in attainment and into either first stage or second stage maintenance, which is clearly good news. Now, if my figures are correct, and what I've been hearing in the meetings lately is that the Title V permit fees have gone up now by 40%. And I think that's largely due to LRAPA following DEQ fee schedules. So obviously, when fees go up like that, it impacts, employment and wages because it's a, cost added to the business. So, I'm curious, is it worth it? Do those fee increases can they be shown to be a big factor in our communities being in attainment now?
Yeah, I mean, I would just respond to that briefly here, Paul. Absolutely. And the fee increases, I would say, recently passed by the Oregon legislature, so statewide. So LRAPA's updating of the fees in our record, really just alignment with the state approach there. But those fee increases were to stabilize the Title V funds for not only DEQ, but for LRAPA, which were in dire straits. And if we're not able to stabilize those fundings, then potentially the end of that sort of road would be DEQ and LRAPA with DEQ losing the delegation authority to implement the Title V program, which basically would mean that we couldn't write Title V air permits any longer. EPA would have to write those air permits. That's something that's never happened before under the Clean Air Act, where the EPA has revoked that authority and taken it back. Maine, some years ago, almost had that happen. And the federal government said, if we have to take the Title V program back, we are also taking the federal transportation highway funding with it. So, which is a pretty significant amount of funding to the state. So Maine raised fees and got their Title V funds stabilized, so they didn't have that consequence. So, and yes, that work is needed and is important because without, it pays for staff time to do those Title V work. Without it, we likely would not be able to assure maintenance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards from our permanent Title V sources.
I will say, I don't think any Title V source was surprised. The fees had been, hadn't been updated in quite a while. Anything else? Okay. Kelly?
I just want to say congratulations to Travis.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd say is that, talking about the wildfire stuff, it's tricky because of the role that LRAPA has. But I think that, we can all acknowledge that in, the ounce of prevention and a pound of cure type thing, it does feel like if there's any opportunity for future discussions on how there might be more, outreach or, I don't know, involvement for prevention. I know we're limited, but it would be an interesting conversation if there is any opportunity there, so.
Okay. Anything?
I guess I'll share, I'm actually meeting with Travis next week and one of my colleagues in public health and a group from the Lane Council of Governments to talk about I would say partnering specifically with the Lane Council of Governments Youth Advisory Council around promoting the use of the purple air monitors in schools, which has both a wildfire component. This group is focused on transportation and like monitoring transportation emissions in parking lots, but also would tie into all kinds of air quality monitoring.
Yeah, and I'll add that I see the benefit of a purple air install providing more insight to what is the PM level at our schools. Pick up, drop off, where buses are at, whatever the case may be. But installing that tool to address that issue, to provide that insight, also provides benefit for wildfire season, which happens and will continue to happen.
Yeah. Okay, well then I don't have anything. We're a bit past time, so meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
I heard back from staff. It looks like the 15th is their target. Travis.
Oh, okay, good to know. Well, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, well, I have.
Thanks.
I'm gonna
Have
go
a good
hop
one.
off, so I don't mean to run, but no, you're right.